Well, good morning, Teresa.
Good morning.
And good morning out to anyone on LinkedIn who's tuning in this morning, and welcome to Thursdays with Culture Talk. It's kind of midsummer here in the US, and we're happy to be back here on our live stream talking about workplace culture and all of the myriad of things that are part of the workplace culture conversation. I'm Cynthia Forstman. I am one of the co-founders of Culture Talk, and I am always happy to be here with my partner in crime, my co-founder and sister. Teresa, how's things in New York today?
It has been stickier in New York this week. Prior to this, the summer had been kind of nice. Now we're experiencing a little bit of that heat and humidity everybody else has been suffering with. And so we're feeling the pain along with other people. But no complaints. We've had a beautiful summer here.
Awesome. Well, we are here to, as we said, we talk about workplace culture, and really one of the things that is different about what we talk about is we really look at workplace culture very holistically in terms of all the different individuals and leaders and teams that roll up to form an organizational system, and how to think about both the system and all of the individual parts. So if you're new to Culture Talk, we'll share more about it later in the broadcast. But today we wanted to touch on a topic that is sort of around assessments in general, because Culture Talk does offer 2 assessment tools. And there are times when you're talking to an organization about introducing an assessment where, a red flag goes up, and you get a little bit of pushback.
Resistance.
Yeah, a little resistance. What we know and what we hear and what we've experienced is that there are a lot of different assessment tools on the market, and survey fatigue is real. Right? Organizations have, asked their employees to take different assessments over the years. And sometimes the objection comes up of like, you can almost see the employees rolling their eyes like, oh, now what?
Now what? Right.
Didn't we do this? Didn't I answer this survey last year? And what happened as a result of answering this assessment? So again,
especially, right, if the employees answered it with intent. Mm-hmm. If they came to it with a sincere desire to participate and help, and then beyond that, they never heard anything. So I think that can make even, sort of turn the screwdriver a little bit too.
Yeah, and I think as well, it can feel a little bit like flavor of the month, right? Oh, the leadership's going to do something about X. And so now we're going to try this and we're going to try that without that follow through. So we do want to address that, and why, I think 2 parts really. Why do assessments get used? Like, what are the value? What is the potential value of using assessments? Where do they go wrong? And how can we position, the need for an assessment in a way that really addresses the needs of the business?
Right. And how do we ensure that the results don't sit in a binder on a shelf or somewhere in a drawer? Was a great experience that we had. Wasn't that a nice team building afternoon? Right. It felt good, but we just went back to the office or the proverbial office, and everything felt the same. Nothing really changed as a result of the activity that we did.
Right. And I probably don't even remember, necessarily how I scored on a particular assessment. Right. So let's dive in. And Teresa, maybe you can kick us off in terms of why do companies do surveys?
Right.
What is this, obsession with surveys?
Right. So there's a plethora of reasons, and each one is well-intentioned. And I think maybe part of the challenge, we can kind of unravel this a little bit, but maybe part of the challenge is that they're so dialed in on a particular use that they are less broadly applicable than an assessment that, has more underlying staying power to it. But with good intention and for good reasons, organizations undertake surveys of individuals, maybe at the time when they're in the hiring process. Maybe lots of different ways in which an assessment informs aspects of, is this person a good match for the job? Maybe there's capabilities that are being measured, or attitudes, or culture fit. There might be a number of different reasons why during that hiring process, an assessment is administered. If not, or even if they did that during hiring, there might be another one that comes to play in the onboarding experience. And so information is kind of being gathered. Maybe a file is being assembled on this person.
What color am I? What are my numbers? What are my letters? Yeah.
Right. And and if that output is used to actually inform, how do I fit on this team? Am I an effective match for it? That would be a good thing, right? That would be a great outcome. We don't know though yet at this point whether that's what's happening. Other times people might be taking assessments. How about understanding team dynamics? How do each of the people come together? Or we're all familiar with leadership assessments, and then the component of the 360, where not only am I responding to an assessment about my leadership capabilities and outcomes, but my direct reports, maybe colleagues, other people are asked to participate in that assessment as well. So those are just a handful of the types of surveys that are most commonly found.
And I want to go back to what you said about them being good intentioned, right? A little bit of self-discovery, self-awareness as you're stepping into a new company, a new job, a new leadership role, a new team, to be able to kind of shine the light on yourself and understand yourself a little bit better. We know that self-awareness is the first step to any kind of development and work, growth. So let's talk about now the other side. So those are sort of individuals,
right? So on the organizational side, perhaps an organization is focused on engagement, and so they really want to understand, this is a important topic these days. How does engagement tie to some of our challenges around retention? How does a strong engagement score help us to attract the right fit employees to begin with? So the recruiting aspect of it. So engagement might be a score that people are looking at, or an assessment. There's a number of different culture assessments out there as well. And they're taking a look at, maybe how we score against particular areas within the organization. So, our leadership style, our financial outcomes, some of the organizational structure and management aspects. And so there's lots of different assessments that are taking a look at the overall culture of an organization.
The health of an organization. And I think in a lot of cases, those assessments are also sort of benchmark focused. So how do we compare to other organizations of our size or in our industry? Are we good or better or worse potentially than a company to which we're being compared?
Absolutely. And I think, layered then on top of those would be management surveys, lots of models out there, lots of proprietary models that are aligned with the delivery of a particular consulting agency or firm, and, with the way that they work with their clients to make those improvements, and we could talk about a lot of detailed areas in which management consulting organization might come in and take a look and measure and do an assessment.
Measure the culture. I was also thinking,
and a lot of those things might be the ways in which the employees never really hear what happened, right?
Right. I'm also thinking about, the whole category of surveys that we might call pulse surveys, right? Which are very a growing popular category of, like, in this moment right now, how does our company, team, leadership, employees feel about XYZ? And to kind of get that real-time feedback that we might call a pulse survey. So Yeah, lots of different things happening in terms of assessments. And, in addition to the well-intentioned, I would also add that, businesses are data driven, right?
Right.
Leadership teams are looking for the levers. They're looking for the data that helps them guide their decisions around growth, around what's working and what's not working, around where they need to shift. And assessments do serve that critical role of being able to lay out a set of data to say, this is where we are, or this is where this individual is.
Right, right. And I
Mm.
think that, to our point about the second half of this, so that's the so what, right? The second half is the now what. And I think that when we think about the outcome of an assessment, let's call it our point A. Here's where we are. It's a measure of what's happening in the environment at a certain point in time. And the now what comes in is, what is the roadmap? Where are we going to go from here? Because we probably are not doing this assessment because we think everything's just fine. Okay, good. Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Right. We are probably looking to make some kind of shift, some kind of change, and to develop a now what, a roadmap to get us to a new place, a point B.
Mhm.
So I think that the survey fatigue might be really perpetuated by the lack of action after the survey is, the results come out. The lack of reporting or feedback about what happens, and the lack of visible activity that helps us to move from point A to point B. So I don't think we'd feel fatigued about a tool that actually moved the needle and helped us to accomplish our goals.
Right. And so, like, there's that classic conundrum of, for example, we do an engagement survey, we never hear about it again. And now, instead of boosting engagement because we've told employees that their opinion matters, we've actually taken a shot at employee morale. Like, they don't really care. That follow through isn't there. So you have to have, to Teresa's point, an action orientation around, what am I going to do with this information once I have it?
Right. I think that's one of the reasons when we think about the now what part, we have a word we use called activate.
Mhm.
So we measure, we validate the results of that outcome, which I think is a really participatory process that allows people to have a voice and a say in, are these results accurate?
Mhm.
So it's not just here it is and it's set in stone, the results of this outcome, this survey, but you have an opportunity to personalize it, add story to it, and really validate that it is actual and true, as opposed to accepting it as fact.
Right.
And then activate. And so, that's where we land in the now what. So how are we going to activate? What is the plan to get from point A to point B? And how many times do we need to take an assessment and then create a roadmap? One of the things I love about Archetype and the assessments that we provide through the CultureTalk framework is that there are so many different things that can happen when you start with the foundation of an archetype profile.
Mhm.
So here's point A. Now we can develop an employment brand that helps us to attract the right people to the organization. And
Right.
as well as using that same profile, we can dig into the nuances that will create the right messaging to attract customers or clients to the organization. But we don't need to resurvey, right? We can use that same outcome.
And let's push that forward a little bit. So now we have done an assessment, we have a profile, we've built a brand around it. And a year down the road, we find that our growth is at a pace that we're going to be in a position of acquiring, another firm that we, potentially is a good fit for us. And now we can take that same assessment that we did to profile our culture when we do it through Archetypes. And it's not dusty in the drawer. It has like a bigger shelf life, right? It has a bigger potential opportunity because we can take that same information and that same profile and apply it or activate it again, to understand how are we going to integrate cultures post-merger, right? How are we going to address the potential gaps that we have between two different cultures?
Right. And I think what's so exciting about that opportunity is this is not nice to have fluffy information about that other company that we're coming together around. Data proves that over 80% of mergers and acquisitions fail to achieve the kinds of results that were forecast. Means they either fail outright or they have really poor performance results. Probably we're talking about from a financial perspective here. They fail to achieve those outcomes 80% of the time, and most of the fail can be laid back on mismatched cultures and the inability of the people to bring the two organizations together. So I love that idea that, that survey that we took a year or two ago, maybe it needs a little bit of, clarification, but the core value of that assessment is going strong in an organization. And then we can use it and add on the implications of a successful merger. That's really valuable. And make sure that there is open communication from day one. That is a really valuable add to the assessment that you did a year or 2 years ago, essentially.
Yeah. And we could even now, we're talking about the organizational side. So again, if you're new to Culture Talk, we have an assessment system that measures both the organizational culture, one of the assessments, and the second assessment measures individual storylines. And both of those two assessments use a single framework. So now if we moved over to the individual assessment side, what is, again, using archetype or story as a framework for conversations around personal and team and leadership development. There's a ton of potential in building a profile the first time. The first time we build an archetypal profile, the first time we take that assessment, we can take the same results of that assessment and activate it in a number of different ways. So if we go back, Teresa, to the hiring example, right? We know that we have companies that are using an archetype assessment, the CultureTalk assessment, to help them deepen different interviews and interview conversations to get to know somebody in a quicker and also a little bit
more authentic
way.
Yeah. The key to really effective hiring is to find out early what are the ways in which this person is a good match and would be an asset to your organization. And, we know that these archetypal conversations just drop us into more authentic, deeper conversations very quickly. So it kind of cuts through the, nervousness, the BS a little bit about, these are the answers I'm supposed to give. And even these are the questions I'm supposed to ask, and allows us to hear people at a human level and allows them to tell their story. Yeah. So, and then once that profile is built and you do bring them in, it's a great way to introduce the other humans on the team and shortcut that experience that people have of, being the new person and feeling their way, not really understanding how to play with and react to the ups and downs of team dynamics. So using that as a way to orient people to the team and the team to the new person, again, with a single assessment with, that sort of reduces the need for multiple assessments to accomplish some of the same outcomes.
Right. And if we talk just about the team, right? Now on a team where everybody is using a profile built around their stories, the conversations, as you said, Teresa, go deeper, but they also become, an opportunity to look at who am I? What do I bring to the team? What do I have to offer? What are the strengths? What are my unique motivational patterns? And how on a team, if you're managing a team, do I put the right people into the right things? How do I understand how to mesh these different motivational patterns and storylines? What engages each of the people on my team, right? So an engagement from a different vantage point, not a question of are you engaged, but a question of how do you engage?
Right.
Because
we did a much deeper level of activation. And as a matter of fact, we've got a question coming in on the LinkedIn feed around just that. How do you sustain it? Does it require a dedicated individual? So is there one holder of the information maybe, or several holders of the information that keep this, results and these profiles alive and bring them, the value? How do we get the continued sustained value from them? Which I think is a great question. And I think the answer lies partly in what you shared about being a single framework. What we find with Archetype is that the language of the framework is easy to understand, and people enjoy engaging with it. It's a human-based, story-driven framework that people start to learn and they adopt. And so the more ways in which you actually activate, it has a dual purpose. First of all, it reduces that fatigue. Second of all, it has everybody sharing and speaking the same language. And then to answer the question about training, yes, absolutely. People inside the organization can become trained, but we often suggest multiple people wearing different hats have the opportunity to get exposed to a deeper level of training, because there are so many ways to use the outcomes and to develop people, and a lot of tools too. That's speaking specifically to how CultureTalk works, but when you use Archetype, many developmental opportunities that can be built into leadership training, conflict resolution, team building, and the addressing of team dynamics, personal branding. How do I show up? Such an important thing to tie my personal motivations, what I care about and what concerns me in the world, with what the mission of the organization is and the purpose of the organization.
And how do I align, right? How do I align my personal purpose with what this organization's purpose? And so going back to that point you made about one framework across the organization. So whatever angle that we're getting to, we have this holistic view of who am I and who are we, and how do I get those two things aligned? How do I, pull people in and get them to lean in on the team and to feel, belonging is a big topic of conversation right now.
Right.
Why and how do people start to feel a sense of belonging, to feel like they're part of something that's bigger than them and more meaningful than them? And story is it is a simple but powerful way. It's got a sticky factor.
Right. So yeah. Then that goes back to the sustainability and the question about how to sustain the results too.
Yeah.
That's
right.
Really
because
important. Yeah.
when we see teams, for example, go through, a discovery process of what are my archetypes, we watch how months and years later, they've adopted the language of archetype because they remember, oh, I have magician, oh, I have explorer, and they feel personally connected to it because of that validation process that you described earlier, right? They have sorted through it and they've said, oh, this is me. I haven't been put in a box. I have been understood. I have been seen. I have been valued. And I'm not a perfect package, but people tend to be a little bit more patient with me because they understand where I'm coming from and how I got here.
Yeah. It's funny. We haven't talked about it like this before, but it's almost like group development, because I have the opportunity with choice to look at colleagues and help them live up to their highest potential based on what I've learned about them. support them when they fall and recognize, hey, it's not the human being, it's the pattern that they're living into right now. And, how can I use my own strengths and skills to support their success, as well as, recognize where we need to be as a team. So, this is the far end of the application, far from the dust in the drawer, that some might experience, but it is really a possibility. And I think that, that's what's one of the most exciting things about the opportunity for working with different assessments, is that there is great possibility if it is activated, if you really, make the commitment to go beyond the experience or the exercise and understand the opportunities to, create a lived experience around the result and the great potential that has. And I'll add that even if you leave an archetype assessment in the drawer for a little while, it kind of sits with you.
Oh my gosh, totally.
And it's doing some magic. And so it's not uncommon for us to hear somebody call 6 months later and say, you'll never guess, but I've been thinking about this and it is still comes up, and I still am getting great value out of what I learned. And so, well, daily ups and downs, right? Sometimes things do need to be set aside for a moment. But the opportunity to go back to that is also a real value.
And I hear you saying that on an individual level, and I think the same thing happens on a team level, and even on an organizational level. That there's the reaction in the moment and the validation that happens in the moment. And then over time, there's like a seeping and a deepening and a stewing and a percolating that goes on as people really start to see the pattern of archetype and how it shows up in their decisions, how it shows up in their reactions, how it shows up in what people value from them, et cetera.
Right.
So I'm going to share a story about one of our partners did their first archetypal work with the team. And the leader on the team in particular was very quiet throughout a workshop experience. And she was a little bit worried, right? Like the leader didn't have too much to say. And the very next day, the leader called her, and really they had an incredibly deep conversation about the self-reflection that this person was able to do on account of looking at their story patterns and recognizing where it was getting in the way of effective leadership for them, right? So they were having an internal, they weren't vocal about the experience, but internally, again, this simple framework stirs up things for us as humans.
And I think that the, understanding that this assessment methodology in looking at archetype is measuring patterns. And so just the word itself means that, we're going to find evidence of this pattern. It's going to show up and it's repetitive. And then the developmental aspect of the work means that there's opportunity to shift the patterns, to change the patterns, and to, really maximize the effectiveness of how do the patterns come together when people and teams come together. So it is exciting. It's very exciting to pick up those, messages and, get those phone calls where people we're hearing what happened yesterday. We're also hearing about what happened a year ago, what happened 2 years ago. Last week, I talked to a partner who was sharing that he was back for a third year in a row working with an organization at their annual retreat, and they were still working with the results of that same assessment. There was still enormous value for the team and the exploration of that. And they had experienced the merger of 4 to 5 different organizations over the course of that 3-year period. So, that kind of no dust there.
Staying power. So yeah, we get that objection that people, put up some resistance to assessment. And I think we should close out by saying, the difference of using story and using a single framework and using something that is not, tied to a moment, but is tied to a pattern, right, that has existed and can be adapted and changed and can be, there's action that can happen as a result of taking this measurement. Those are some of the things that stand out about using CultureTalk specifically, and the 12 archetype framework around which our assessment tools are built.
Yeah. So thank you for joining us this week. We will be back over the next few weeks with a whole lot more ideas about how using archetype, really understanding and diving into culture can be a powerful tie to business outcomes and success in many different ways. So we look forward to seeing you then.
Yeah, and if we pique some interest, reach out to Teresa or I. We're always happy to share an assessment with you and give you the experience of looking at your own archetype pattern. So hit one of us up for that, and enjoy the rest of your week.
Bye-bye.